This is the beginning. I'll introduce myself first. Is that polite?
We're still being quiet. That's better. The one that's talking has to
Okay.
do the right.
I'm Mariellen Paulus. This is my grandmother, Julia Forst. This is Rita Shue. And Grandma's her grandmom too. And,
That makes it even.
We're making a videotape about Grandmom because we want everybody to know about her and her family and what came before her. So, guess we could get started.
Okay.
Okay. Let's see what all these questions are here. I'm going to start with your grandparents. All right. So, did you know your grandparents?
I knew my grandparents. I used to go to visit them after I was about 6 years of age. Mother put me on the train in St. Clair, and they'd meet me up in Shamokin. And I'd stay with them then about a week or not. So, and then they'd send me back home again. This is the way we used to travel all the time because you had no buses or anything like that. So we go by train. And you'd tell the conductor where you wanted to get off, and the tupper take you. Oh, I used to go to Ashton and everywhere like that.
Now, how close were you to the train then? Was it
Well,
long walk?
we were talking about that yesterday. You had to walk everywhere that you wanted to go because there was only horses. There was no streetcars or anything like that. And then everybody didn't own a horse, you know, so we used to just walk wherever we wanted to go. It was very common. It was about 5 blocks up to the train station. Mother would take me up and introduce me to the man. So I was up with grandmother and grandpap even before grandpap died. He didn't live too long after I was old enough to remember him. But he was a very tall, thin person. And
this is your mom's parents.
Yeah, and he was very tall, and grandma was very short. Grandma was only about 5 feet. And so anyhow, their name was Bobber. His name was Joseph Bobber, and Grandma's name was Catherine. And they had quite a number of children. They had about 5 boys and 4 girls. And Mother was the oldest because she was born when they came over from Poland. That's where they came from. And Grandpap was, as they used to call it in those days, he was from the nobility, and grandmother was a servant.
Now, was his name Bobber in Poland?
Always was Bobber.
Yeah.
So when...
Doesn't sound Polish, does it?
No, it doesn't, but it was. And then, see, he had to leave home because he married beneath an station. So then they came over to Shamokin, but on their way home, Mother was born in Germany because they had to stop off in Germany for a little while because to make the connections with the ship to get back over to America, it used to take them quite a couple of months before they finally got to their destination. So they settled up in Shamokin.
Now, why do you think they came to Shamokin?
Well, I imagine over in Shamokin there was a lot of Polish people. And eventually some of her sisters came over to this country.
Did they come live with you?
No, they all had their own homes. They were married and lived by themselves. But Grandpap never got in touch with his folks back in Poland after he moved to Shamokin. But there was a Monsignor who was at the head of the St. Stanislaus Church that knew my father and knew his people over in Poland. And because of that, he used to get his mail whenever his daddy's people would write. They would write to the Monsignor, and then the Monsignor would get in touch with Grandpap. And that's how Mother got her education, because she would go up to the Monsignor and he would teach her how to speak. They spoke Polish when they came over, but it didn't take them long to learn English because they had to learn it to get along. But then when Daddy was, well, I guess he was about 20 or 24 years old when he was hurt very badly in the mines. Most of his face, and he had inhaled some of the smoke and all, so that he couldn't go back in the mines anymore. So then they moved to St. Clair, and Daddy opened a saloon. And we had a beautiful saloon. It had cherry wood. It was really beautiful.
Now, how did he manage to buy the saloon or whatever?
Well, the property in those days were not much, and I don't know how he got the money to buy it, but probably from his father. You know what I mean? I presume so. Because, well, I don't mean his father, I mean my mother's father. Because Daddy's people never came over from Poland. He was the only one of his family that came over.
He was the only one? So when he came over, he lived by himself, or?
I haven't any recollection where he lived because I can only go back as far as when Mother and Daddy were married. And his mother was very young. And of course, I think when they were married, they stayed right in the neighborhood where their mother lived. Their houses there were very small. They lived on the outskirts of Shamokin. It was called Springfield. And the houses were very small. And eventually, a lot of Grandma's sisters came over and lived right in that same neighborhood. But I was going to say before I get on further on with the story of Grandmother's her children. She had 5 boys, and 3 of them were killed in the mines in one night.
Oh my God.
And yes, and it really affected Grandma because she was white by the time they got the bodies out.
Oh my goodness.
So,
they were young?
Oh yes, they weren't even, some of them I guess were 20 probably. Right. 2 of them might have been a little over 20, but they were very young.
That must have been hard on your mother too, losing 3 brothers at one time.
Well, I think that at that particular time in life when you're busy raising a family,
she was already out of the house.
She was already in St. Clair, yes. It's really funny the way they lived in St. Clair because we had a big rambling house. It had, let me see, there was an attic to it that had 2 big rooms that had a thatched roof, and the 2 rooms were big enough to have a double bed in each room with your furniture. They were really big, but it had a thatched ceiling so that it was only the center of the room that was high. The rest of it you'd have to just like sort of
stoop.
So that gave them room for 4 people who used to sleep up there. Then on the 2nd floor we had 1, 2, 3, 4 more bedrooms.
Wow.
And we used to have our living room upstairs because the saloon was downstairs, so we had the 2 rooms upstairs furnished and had them made into a living room. It was very nice and comfortable. And then downstairs we had a big downstairs. We had not a small kitchen and a medium-sized dining room, and then there was another great big room next to that we used to use it for our recreation room or just a general.
It's a big house. Most houses are now.
And then besides that, then the saloon came right next to that, and on the other side of the saloon there was another room that when I was growing up was rented out to a shoemaker. And many a day I would sit on that counter and watch him mend and shoe.
That would be fun.
Yeah, it was. But I was going to tell you how beautifully the saloon was fixed up now. I don't know whether Daddy bought it already furnished or whether he did it, but it had a back counter with all glass, and it was really very beautiful. It was cherry wood, and it had like your cabinets on. It would have the cupboards down below to store different things. And then we had a basement. And in the basement, it wasn't like you have today that the whole basement would be cleaned out for underneath the whole house. We had 4 different types of cellars. There was one cellar underneath the saloon, and you couldn't get into the other cellar from there. You had to go down from the kitchen to get down into the other part of the cellars, and they were never cemented or anything. It was just the ground that was there, just dirt. So really, it was really different because there was a trap door behind the counter in the saloon that you could go down because they used to keep the barrels of beer down there, and then they'd have have to come up and they'd be able to pour it from up in the saloon. But we were never allowed in the saloon. When the doors were open, the door going into the back part of the house was kept closed, and you had to dare open it.
I was wondering about that, whether you were.
My father had a very bad temper, and you didn't open the door.
You learned that real fast.
I don't remember him spanking me.
But just his voice, I guess, would do it.
Yeah, it was really funny. My mother was quite young when she got married, and they got married up in Shamokin.
Now, she was born in Germany, and then she came over, and they settled in Shamokin.
She was only a little tiny baby when she came over.
Right. Just born.
Yes.
And then she grew up in Shamokin.
In Shamokin, yes.
And she met your father in
those days, the weddings were arranged by the parents. I don't think he ever went courting.
So your parents must have picked him to marry their daughter?
That's right.
And he must have, I wonder what he was doing. Must have been living in the same community
sure
or whatever.
He was right up in Springfield with the rest of there was a lot of Polish people up there.
So they picked him.
And when Mother and Father moved to St. Clair, Anne and Ella were the only children who was then living. So Mother had one child that died when there was a very small infant. So Anne and Ella, when they came back into St. Clair, they couldn't speak a word of English. They spoke Polish. So much so that Mrs. Wellner, who used to have a candy store, used to tell us about it years later, because he used to go up and point
what they
wanted out of the cakes.
Hey, it worked.
You got a couple of pennies, and that's what you bought, just a penny's worth of candy.
The infant that died, was that before Anna?
Oh, yes.
So her firstborn died in infancy.
Well, I think the infant rate in those years was high.
Was high.
Yeah. But it really was something, though, to watch them. But Father stayed in the saloon. He didn't get up very early. Well, Mother used to go in the saloon in the morning.
She ran
Did
it
she
in the
keep
morning.
it clean? Did all this
Oh yes, Mother was spotless.
So she did all that in the morning.
Well, the miners used to stop in the morning for a drink. They would get a shot of liquor and a big glass of beer
On the way to work.
on the way to work. They had to walk about 5 miles to get to work,
Oh my word.
because they used to work over near Wadeswood, which was a little town outside of St. Clair. So it was nothing common. Then Daddy would get up about 9 o'clock and he'd take over. There wasn't much business during the day because it was just little stragglers that would come in. Most of the business was in the evening. And before the First World War, there was only men would come, you know. But after the First World War, then the women came and they would sit in the next room with their husbands or whoever they came with, you know. And they would sit there and drink. But the women never drank to any excess. They only came to keep their husbands company, you know. They'd have a glass of beer or something like that and then go out. But it was funny. Daddy was very strict. He was a very bashful man. And he was tall and thin. He was never very heavy. And of course, Mother's maiden name was just Stoddard, the same as her mother's.
Right.
And then Daddy, my father's name when he first came to this country was not Moleskine or Miller.
What?
I could never begin to pronounce it. It was Chiewiskie or something like that.
I've seen that name.
Yes.
Say that again. Chiewiski, like that?
No, there's an E comes
There's
in
an
there.
E in there somewhere.
Anywhere's fine.
Well, when he went to get his papers, you know, for citizenship papers, the people were very illiterate in those days, and they couldn't even spell it. So they gave him a name that they could spell.
So they gave him Moleskine?
Moleskine.
Now how do you spell Moleskine?
M-A-L-E-S-K-I-E.
So when he came over, they just gave him that name?
Yeah, so, you know, then not when he first came over, this was when he took out his naturalization papers. They had to be in this country a little while before they could get your naturalization paper. Sure. And then the funny part of it was when my brothers got older, they legally changed their name to Miller, the 3 boys.
You had told me that one time. They did that for what reason?
Well, they were in medicine, and there was still that feeling of them not belonging to the country, because even though they were second grade citizens, not second grade, but they were
second. Right, considered second class.
Yes. What do they call it when you're second?
Second rate.
No.
Second generation?
Second generation.
Oh, okay, okay. I see what you're saying,
Yes, they were second generation. And the people didn't like foreigners. In those days, they were very much opposed to them. So that for that reason, they changed their name to Miller.
Now when you didn't change your name though, right?
Not legally.
But did you just start calling yourself Miller after they changed their name?
Yes, after I started to go to Pierce School.
You changed it to Miller?
Because that's why I was listed there as the name was Miller. So I was going to tell you too about St. Clair. St. Clair was a very small, lovely little town, and it's laid out beautifully. It's a square little town, and the streets just run straight up and down. I mean,
A grid like.
yes, and
right.
no curves or no angles or anything like that to it. And the whole second street was lined with trees, and they were beautiful. And it was that way, up until I guess after I was married even. They were still that way. Maybe, I don't remember now just when it was that they, after the automobiles came into an existence, that they were going to pave the second street, because before that time it was never paved, it was just dirt, because it was only horses that used to go up it. So then they decided that they would cut all the trees down so that the people would be able to see better. It wouldn't interfere with the traffic.
Boy.
And nobody wanted them cut. But our neighbor that lived just about a half a block for us, she sat under the tree and she didn't want to let them cut that tree down. She was an elderly woman, and she and Mrs. Farabee, they had a livery stable right across the street from us. And they used to rent cabs and things for funerals and weddings and things like that. No automobiles. You either walked or you rode that way. And she didn't want those trees cut down, but they finally cut them. They haven't built them up now. Now I just got a letter from one of the women up in St. Clair that told me that they don't use 2nd Street now as the traffic going from one place to another, that they have bypassed it. This has been going on for years. They were going to do it, but finally they did. So it makes it much nicer, but I hope they put the trees back.
Yeah, that would be nice.
Yeah.
That'll take 20 years though to have them
Easily,
grow.
all of that.
Right,
Yeah.
right.
Yeah. But the town today has built up quite nicely, and the people are taking more care of their houses, because even though there's not that much up there, still I think in general everybody has nicer homes today. It makes it more interesting for them.
You told me one time about your grandmother and your mother having babies at the same time.
That's right. Well,
Now,
that's
who were
another
they?
thing. That was another thing I was going to say. You know, they didn't have baby bottles like you.
It must have been a lot different.
They did. Well, when I was a little child, I remember. Well, mothers nursed their babies for 2 years. The baby
my
was
word.
Well, the babies were born and they had long clothes on. No baby got out of a crib until they were about 7 or 8 months old. They stayed laying down because they couldn't walk if their clothes.
They were always laying down.
They had these long things on them. The children didn't grow up as fast as they do now. So a mother nursed her baby for at least 2 years.
Oh boy.
So it was and then, you know, if a mother had a baby and they couldn't nurse them, they used to have what they called the wet mothers. And they would, many times, you might have read about it in history years back,
I've heard that, yeah.
where the wet people would take, especially with the nobility, they would have someone else
Right,
come to
nurse
nurse
the
their
baby.
baby. So mother's baby, I don't say they had the 2 children were born probably the same week or something like that, but within the period of time that mother was nursing her one child, grandmother had Aunt Ella. And so the mother nursed the baby for her, because by that time grandma was a little older, and she
right.
didn't have the nourishment.
Now, who was your mother's child?
That would have been
Yeah.
Anna. Either Anna, I think it would have been Anna, maybe the child before, because
The
it might
child
have happened
before.
while they were still up in Shamokin, before they came to St. Clair. But they often used to laugh about it years later.
Well, when did they first feed babies food then? When you had your babies?
Well, when I had my children, they were just beginning to bring baby food out, just beginning, because we used to put our baby's food through a strainer. But then the baby food came out about that time.
So you did, why, they were nursed till they were 2, but they also were eating too. They must have been. They must have been eating
Up to
food
2
too.
years old.
Yeah.
Well, I would
They must have
imagine
been,
so,
yeah.
but then they didn't have pasteurized milk.
So that's why you probably kept nursing them, because they couldn't handle the milk.
Sure.
Yeah.
The pasteurized milk came in much later, so that It's really strange looking back to the childhood that I have and the childhood that the children have today, because even though we had a big house, we didn't have a bathroom, or we didn't have a toilet indoors. You had to go outside for the toilet. And we, not having a bathroom, we didn't have any running hot water. We had hot, cold water. We had a basin in the kitchen with one spigot that was just cold water. We were fortunate to have the water in the house, because lots of people didn't have the water in the house. And we also had a hydrant outside. But the hot water, some people had stoves that had a thing in the back of their coal stoves, like a tank in the back,
and they would heat
where
the water?
it would heat the water. It was just attached to the stove, but we didn't have that kind. We just had the regular stove that you had. We always had a great big kettle, and you kept it on the stove that there was always warm water there. And when we wanted to take a bath, we had little wooden round tubs that we would put in the kitchen, and we'd take our bath in the kitchen.
Oh gosh.
While there wasn't the privacy that you have today in a bathroom, still there was nothing that bold about it. Everything was done nicely without any thought of exposure or anything like that.
Well, what, did you have an outhouse then?
We had an outhouse, and they used to have to clean it twice a year.
Who did that?
Well, they had that service.
Oh, people did that.
But my father got tired of that because he didn't like the smell that it used to have. So Daddy put it on a sewer. And he had it when you would flush draw water in the kitchen, the drain would go down, it would go down through the toilet, and it would wash it down into the creek. Because there was a creek about, I guess, a block and a half away from where we lived. And when you would go to that bathroom outside in the wintertime, it was cold.
I'll bet it was.
Because with having this new arrangement with the sewer, it was all open. See, before when the other way it used to be all closed in.
Well, did he build that sewer line or whatever?
Oh, yes. He used to do a lot of
determination.
Yeah, that is, isn't it?
But I have to tell you something funny. We had a shingled roof. And one of the oddest things that I ever saw anybody do, and I never saw anybody but my father do it, he built a trough outside, and it was about, I guess, about 5 feet long, the trough, just like a regular wooden trough. And then he had a barrel of red paint on the one end of it, and an empty barrel on the other side. And he would take each shingle and dip it in the paint and put it up on the top and let it drip down. And then the extra paint would go back in the other
Into the
cup.
empty can.
And this way, he said that when the shingles were put on the roof, the shingle is placed one half over top of the other one. Well, there was all paint underneath it, and then it made it last longer. And that saves you the trouble of getting up there after it was all put up to paint it.
Oh, jeez.
There was a lot of work to do around the house. Right?
It was really funny. But he was very active, Daddy was. In fact, when, as I told you before, Mother had boarders. She used to bring the boarders in they used to come over from Poland, and they couldn't speak English, and then she would keep them there until they learned the language, and they used to sleep up in the attic. And then when they would come home, they'd work in the mines, and when they would come home from the mines, they would take their bath in the kitchen. And they came home about 4 o'clock, just got them out of the kitchen in time for Mother to cook. And they'd get down on their knees, they'd keep their pants on, and just strip their tops, and then they'd lean over the bathtub, and we used to wash their back for them, because with the sponge and wash their back.
How old were you when you were doing this, little girl?
Oh, anywhere from about 8, 9 up to about 12 years of age. Sure. You didn't mind. They just stay there and you'd wash their backs. Now they have in the mines later on, they had washrooms up there, and then they didn't come home dirty like that, but in the beginning they did. But my mother used to get up about 4 o'clock in the morning, and when we'd be coming down for breakfast, she'd have all her cakes baked and the pies and the bread. We used to have fresh bread many times for breakfast. She'd take it out, and she'd cut the 4 crusts off because the bread would be hot, and we'd all sit down and put butter on it, and that'd be our breakfast. It was good.
Did she bake like that all the time?
All the time. Even I think I was already in high school when she stopped baking when she got her arm broken. And she couldn't bake, and she had already started a batch of bread, so she says to me what I needed for her. Well, you know, they had no electricity like that to knead bread.
You really had to use your elbow grease, right?
And it was hard because she used to bake about 6 loaves, I guess, in big loaves like this.
That's a lot.
Yeah.
So what kind of things did you eat then? You had this bread and butter for breakfast. What kinds of other foods did you eat?
For breakfast, never anything but bread and butter, maybe an egg.
Mm-hmm.
But not anything different than that. We didn't have whole cereals like you folks had. We used to have oatmeal in the wintertime. They'd know oatmeal and mush. You know, they used to have fried mush. I bet you never heard of that.
No, what's
Fried
that?
mush.
For breakfast you had that? For breakfast?
Yeah, it was good. I think mush is made out of cornmeal.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And then you just you would mold it, and then after it sets, you would slice it. You'd make it, you know, like you wouldn't use it all up at one time. It'd be a big pan full of mush,
And
you just slice it and fry it. It was delicious.
Mm-hmm. Like potato pancakes,
Yeah.
but not potato. Cornmeal instead. Yeah.
But we never had a cooked breakfast as such in the morning, only something like that.
Yeah.
And we didn't eat an awful lot of meat because meat was too expensive. You didn't have an awful lot of meat. We had a butcher across the street. There was an English butcher. He came over from England, and he used to cook very good meat, very good.
Mm-hmm.
I used to enjoy our food.
What kinds of things did you have for lunch then? Did you have sandwiches like we do? You didn't have lunch meat, I guess.
No, we didn't. Well, they had lunch meat.
Yeah?
Yes, they used to have lunch meat, but not the same kind of lunch meat like you have. They used to have what we used to call pudding. You call it, I think, liver bologna. And it used to come in rings. And the butcher used to make it himself. And he used to make something that they have over in England, but what you don't often get here in the States was faggots. It would look almost like a meatball, but it was in like a little casing, and it used to have a lot of pudding in that he used to make himself with different parts of the indoors.
Leftovers. Yeah, right, like sausage or whatever.
Yeah, that's right. But it was good. We used to fresh sausage because the farmers used to make that. They always had fresh sausage. Not so much smoked sausage, but the fresh sausage.
Yeah.
But we know canned goods. They were afraid to eat canned goods because they hadn't already perfected the cans, and they were afraid they'd get poisoned. So they used to have sardines and fish that would come in cans, but that would be like imported. It wasn't, but otherwise. And then the transportation was different because, you see, everything that was come from Philadelphia or anywhere else had to come by train. Well, then they hadn't any way of refrigerating the stuff because we only had ice boxes, and you couldn't keep anything, nothing frozen, no frozen food at all. Imagine what it was like.
So every day you went to the market and bought what you needed for the day?
Well, you know, I had a letter from Sally the other day, and she says this is what they do over in Germany now.
Oh, really?
That the refrigeration over there is not as good as it is here. And she takes a little basket and goes, you have to shop every morning. But we were saved a lot of that at home because
you said you had
the
a
hucksters
milkman
would come.
and
The milkman used to come and deliver the milk, and the bread man used to come and have bread. But they didn't have a whole lot of cakes or anything. They used to have cinnamon buns and breakfast cakes, but they didn't have regular fancy cakes. The people at home used to bake them. And
everything was homemade.
sure, and then we had the farmer come twice a week, and then we'd have a fisherman come on Friday.
Really?
Yeah.
Oh, so you didn't have to go out.
No. And then when you went to the store, they had a store just a block away from the house, and they didn't sell everything like you get packaged things. Everything was loose. You bought sugar by the pound. They'd weigh it and give you by the pound. If you went for beans, dried beans or anything, rice or anything, was all loose, not packaged. The only thing that I can remember being packaged was Unita biscuits. I remember having Unita biscuits. And then I must have been about 10 or 12 years of age when I first had a taste of peanut butter. And then it
Wow.
used to come in little tiny jars like that, and it used to be very expensive. We didn't have it at home. And Maud used to buy it. And I'd go down there and eat hers.
Ah.
She wasn't my real aunt, but she took me under her wing. And I used to go down quite often. I spent a lot of time down there. She used to have me watch her mother. Her mother was old. And I was small even before I started school. I used to go down and she said, her mother used to sit at the window. And she'd say to me, now I have to go so-and-so. I won't be gone more than about a half to an hour. And I only want you to sit on the chair there beside Grandma. And she said, if she goes out in the kitchen to shut up the stove, I want you to go out and open it. Now that's all you have to do. Because the poor soul, I guess, was colder. She'd go out and shut up the stove, and I had to go out and make sure she'd get burned. That was funny.
You were telling me another time you didn't have any paper products.
None.
So then what did you use? Tell us what you used.
Well, we used handkerchiefs that we had to wash and iron them.
Right.
You didn't have anything else.
Yeah,
In the
no
same
paper
way.
towel.
When the babies came around, they didn't even have rubber panties in years back. The rubber panties that they had when I had my children were not like the rubber panties you have now. They were terrible. And if you kept them on the baby too long, if you didn't change the baby got sore because they were heavy rubber. And
there was no air.
then we didn't have toilet paper. We used newspapers when we went to the bathroom, and Sears catalog enough.
Came in handy.
That's true, but I take the whole Sears catalog
That's
book out.
probably why they charge you for it now.
But the first time that I ever saw or heard of a Kleenex was one of the men had to go to a sanitarium. He had TB, and when he came back, they told him that he had to have paper goods, so that he could, when it was finished using it, he used to put it in a brown bag and discard it that way. And that was the first time, but no paper towels or anything like that. There all this stuff that you use for cleaning.
Right.
We didn't have anything like that either. We felt an after soap.
That was it.
But no liquid detergents or
Everything
anything.
got clean with the bells and
Well,
whistles.
didn't you bathe with it and wash
Oh,
the
yes.
clothes, everything?
My mother used to wash the children's hair in Belgian
Right.
after soup, even my children. Yes,
Doesn't even smell good.
well, you would have liked the smell. It's got a clean smell. The naphtha in it, I think it gives it a clean smell. But that's it.
Well, when you were growing up, what was your typical day like? Did you have a lot of chores to do around the house?
Oh yes, we always had to wash the dishes as soon as we were old enough to do it. And of course, I was one girl in with 4 boys, and the boys didn't like to
so
wash
you
dishes. So I used to wash them, and they used to dry them. And many a dish got broken over a fight because nobody wanted to do
To
it.
do them. Yeah.
I can remember we used to, again, we didn't have only cold water. We used to have a basin that you put in the sink and wash the dishes in that, and then stand them on a board, for them to drain. And then there was no place like this. You didn't have a whole lot of room. And we used to pull a drawer open and put the container there and put the dishes in that. And I can still remember Anton and I, he was drying and I was washing. We got into an argument, we pushed the drawer shut and all the dishes fell on the floor. And they all smashed.
Oh, you're kidding.
Oh, I'm not.
Yeah, now maybe you could show us how to be better mothers. How did your mother react to that?
Well, I only remember that I got spanked because
bet you did.
Anton ran out.
So you got it.
But that wasn't the worst calamity that we had in the house. At Easter time, the children used to pick eggs. I don't know, they still do some places, but not much.
Well, like an Easter egg hunt.
No.
Oh, real eggs.
You would take an egg and boil it until it got hard boiled, and then you would hold the egg in your hand, and then the other person with their egg would come and butt it, and whoever's egg cracked, that was the one you would win the egg, and then you took the egg. Well, you used to sometimes get a good strong shelled egg, and you would save it. So our Stanley had his, and he put it way up in the top of the cupboard, and the cupboard was got like this. The cupboard used to be put in there like that, and it wasn't fastened real sure. So this day he went up there and he wanted to get his egg and he gave the thing a pull, the whole thing fell down. I mean, there was hundreds of dishes in there and they all got broken. And now I tell you, he took a shovel and shoveled them out with the wheelbarrow.
That's
all
broken dishes that we have.
good dishes and everything. And that was the time he was afraid. He was
bet.
afraid of Daddy at that time. But he often talks about it just today. That's one of the things he remembers. But it was something. But we used to get up in the morning. And now before I went to school, I don't have too much recollection what we did. But first of all, I want to tell you, we didn't have as many clothes as you folks have.
No.
Oh, no. In the first place, our winters were cold. We had winter clothes. The snow would come down in October, and it would last till March. I mean, very seldom did the ground get clear that you could see the ground. The snow would be on the ground most all winter, so that we would wear long underwear. And I can remember I had a quilted skirt, and it was a black one, because you didn't wear real light clothes, you wore things that were heavy. And you only had about three different changes, because you couldn't buy the clothes ready-made, and you had to have them made. Things were expensive. And the women only had house dresses that they used to wear, that they used to call them wrappers. And they were made something like our nightgowns are today, with a little yoke and then full. And they just they were pretty materials, but they were all made out of cotton. And then they had a good dress for Sunday, and of course they would get dressed up in the evening for when they would have their dinner with another dress, but they didn't dress like us. We didn't have closet space. You didn't need closets because you didn't have that many things.
You didn't have many things.
And then when we would go to wash, we had to wash and rub the clothes on a board and scour them. And then the clothes would get dirty because some of the children used to get black. They were out.
Right. That's what I was thinking with
They
kids.
were out inside, and there was nothing. Well, we used to have a brick walk. We didn't have a cement. They didn't use cement so much as they had bricks. And you'd get dirty. So we used to put the clothes in a boiler and boil them. And then leave them stand on the stove for about an hour and let them boil for about 10 or 15 minutes. Then you had to scoop these hot things
Hot clothes out.
out of the boiler and put them in a pan and then rinse them.
Jeez. Now, did you do this every night with the kids playing and getting dirty all the time?
No. We washed about twice a week, maybe 3 times. But all of the clothes didn't have to be boiled. It was only those that were soiled real badly. And then another thing, we didn't have what you would call nightgowns. We used to sleep in our underwear because, we weren't that wealthy that you could afford all these kind of necessities that you had.
Right.
And therefore, but we had to make sure that we always used to keep the kitchen clean for Mother and do the dishes. And then the boys used to have to get wood. Your wood would be outside. They'd have to bring in the wood for the day and things like that. And then in the springtime, when it would be a little bit warmer, then they would get the lumber from over by the railroad, the old ties that they used to have on the railroad, where they would discard the old ones and just lay them on the side of the railroad tracks. They'd go over and you could take them, and then they would saw them and cut them up.
So you had a wood burning stove that warmed the house, or?
No, it was coal stove, but you had to start it with wood.
With this wood.
Sometimes you could keep the stove going, but if you would forget to put coal on to go out, then you had to add some more wood before you could put the coal on. And then down the cellar, they used to get their 2 tons of coal by one time, and then the boys used to have to carry the coal up and down the basement. And then you had to get rid of the ashes because it was a lot of work.
A lot of work to do.
A lot of work for the boys to do. Because, and then another thing, the boys, when they got to be 14 years old, they went to work. Because they didn't have to, it wasn't legal that you had to go to school until you were 16.
When did they go to school? Until what grade?
They went to school until they graduated, usually from high school, which was only in our town a 3-year high school. And then they would be probably about 16, and then they would go right to work. Very few children went into Pottsville High for their 4th year like we did. Both Anton and I went in for our 4th year, so because if you wanted to go into college, you had to have the credits from 4 years of high.
Well, how about your brothers that were doctors? Didn't they?
Well, they had to have, you see, they had to go 4 years to school. They went, but now the class that I graduated from high school, there were only 3 boys left by the time we graduated. And none of them, only Anton went into Pottsville High to go finish his 4th year.
Because they all dropped out to go to work.
Well, that's right.
How did it turn out that you were young when you finished high school, right?
Well,
How did that
that's
happen?
a long story.
Yeah.
That's a funny story. I was thinking about that too. Well, we only had one parochial school in St. Clair, and it was run by the German sisters, St. Boniface. And they only had 2 big rooms, and in those rooms they would put all their pupils, and then they would teach different grades in, there would be about 3 grades in one room, because they would teach up to about the 6th grade. Well, you had to, they wouldn't let you go to communion unless you went to the parochial school. Well, all Catholics usually did go, especially till they made their first communion. Well, you had to pay to go to the parochial school, 50 cents, I know it was 50 cents a week or 50 cents a month, but I know it was
Big
a lot of
difference,
money.
right? Yeah.
Well, I started into parochial school so that I could make my first communion, but my father objected to paying 50 cents for each one because Anton was there, and by that time Joe was out because he was old enough and he had already graduated from there. So I went until Daddy would find out which school I was going to, when he'd have to pay his 50 cents, and he'd say, there's no necessity of her going to the parochial school, she's too young, just give her into public school until she is old enough to make her first communion, and then send her back, maybe for the last year before I was ready to go. So Mother would take me out of school and take me over to the public school. Well, that'd go on maybe for a year or 2, and then Mother would put me back in the parochial school. This was really funny. Well, the result was that when I was about 11 years of age was when the new edict came through that the younger children could make their communion younger than they said before they were 12. So by that time, Anton and I we weren't in the same class. I was below him. But when we finished after we made our first communion, we had to take an examination to enter the public school then. So whoever was going to go into public school after that time had to take this examination. And unfortunately, I passed with as good a grade as his, so I was put in the same class with him. So that's how it was that I had skipped, that I graduated with him at a younger age.
So you graduated with him? So he was 2 years older than you? So you skipped 2
And I
grades.
started school early. And I started in the public school.
Right.
Because I can remember that I didn't want to leave the first grade. I liked my teacher so much I cried. I just wanted to stay right with her. And she used to come into the 2nd grade when I was in 2nd grade to pacify me. She was a lovely teacher. Very nice. But that's how that happened. And then I learned all my reading and all my catechism and all my prayers in German. Not in English, in German, because
from the nuns they taught you.
Yes,
In
but
German,
of course, my arithmetic and history and different things like that was in English. But your reading and your writing was in German. Isn't it funny? And I remember very little of it. I remember the writing of it, and different things like that. But when I was old enough after I got out of parochial school, and went up to St. Mary's, the English, by that time the Irish people had this other church up there. I didn't know any of the prayers. I had to learn all them all over again.
And weren't the prayers in Latin then, the masses?
The Mass, yes, but your Our Father and your Hail Mary
Was in
in German.
Now, what happened with your parents being Polish? Did you speak Polish at all?
My mother was disgusted with me.
That's honest.
Yeah, I couldn't twist my tongue. Mother would get you on your knees and you would kneel. She would sit on the chair and you would kneel and she would teach you your Our Father and Hail Mary and the Apostles' Creed in Polish. Well, if you ever have been to a different nationality church and heard how long the Apostles' Creed
Oh,
is,
is it long?
oh
Yeah.
my goodness, it's as long as it can be. And I couldn't twist my
Couldn't
tongue
get
to
it.
say the words.
Yeah.
Oh, she used to get so mad at me. So I never learned Polish, never. I could understand a little bit of it when I was younger, when they used to talk around the house, but I don't retain any of it. No, she used to get so mad at me. And then when we used to go to German church, and the priest would preach in German, I couldn't understand him either much. And we used to have to go in the afternoon on Sundays to, what they call that now? Every Sunday we went. They don't have it anymore.
You mean
Vespers. We had to go to Vespers. And the priest would, right before Vespers, he would have a class in catechism for the pupils before Vespers started. Now, Vespers lasted an hour, and the half hour before that, you would have the questions and answers. And if you didn't get your answers right, he would make you kneel up at the communion railing all during Vespers. They were very much harder and more disciplined than they have today. That's why I said the children are raised too carefully these days. They're not trained hard enough. They're not accustomed to taking their bumps that when they get out into real life, they're not accustomed to taking them. Makes it very difficult.
Parents were stricter than
Oh my goodness, yes. I'd say they were strict.
Your mother, do you have, you told us a little bit about her. What was she like? Was she the disciplinarian in the house, or was she very comforting kind of mom?
I think she was mother and father because Daddy didn't have patience, but Mother did, and I don't say she was strict, but she made you do what she wanted to do.
Right.
And once in a while she would scold, and I used to say to her, "Oh, Mom, stop scolding, give me a spanking and get it over with."
Wow. Oh, gosh. I guess you got one after you said that, huh?
No.
Wow.
But Mother was a short woman too. She was about 5 feet tall, maybe 5'1", and she had beautiful chestnut brown hair. And she was a good-looking little woman, very tiny. She wasn't, well, I don't say she was thin, because in those days people didn't think about weight. They just let their bodies grow. But she was a happy person and never complained. I never heard my mother in all my life ever heard her make one complaint, never. So much so that everybody used to think, her sisters and all, used to think she was lined with money because she never complained that she hadn't it. And Daddy was strict with money because Mother would give all that she had away, and she'd never have anything. She took everybody into the house. I remember Daddy coming in one day, and in the dining room, this elderly man was sitting on a rocking chair. And Daddy says to Mama, "Who is he?" Mother said, "That's Mr. Delkamp." Oh, so that next day the man was still sitting in the chair back there again. So Daddy says to Mother, "What's the story?" Well, she says, "You know how it is. Mrs. Delkamp helps me in the kitchen once in a while. And they lived across the street and they were put out. And she said, they get along all right. We'll keep them for a little while until they get a place." 2 years later, they were still there.
Wow.
But this was Mother. Every time anybody needed anything, so much so, with everything. So I can remember her taking her curtains off the windows and giving them to some woman because her daughter was getting married and she needed curtains.
Oh, gosh.
And anybody that needed money, she was there. Some Daddy used to hide the money so she couldn't
Couldn't give it away. Oh, gosh.
But in the same way anybody was sick. You asked me how my brothers, happened to become doctors. Anybody that was sick. The people didn't go to the doctors for every little thing. And when any of the children or somebody gets sick, they'd bring them up to Mother, and Mother would treat them or tell them what to get. And so much so that Mother used to go with the doctors there to interpret for them, the different people when they couldn't speak English when they would come into town.
Now, how did she do all this and have
Well, she was
Oh,
quick.
you
She got
did.
up at 4 o'clock in the morning.
She
I'm
just
telling you.
kept going.
Yeah, she just, oh my goodness, she worked
The
hard.
energy.
Yeah.
And always full of energy. And very happy. Never, no matter what was the matter, what was going on, she was happy. And we used to have a doctor, the doctor used to come from Pottsville, and he used to have a colored fellow drive the horse and buggy, because that's the only way they had it traveling. And I think he used to tell Mother, he says, there's only 365 days in the year, and he says, I think I come over here 350. But then, and no matter what was the matter with her, she'd call the doctor, Dr. Boone. And I think that's another reason why the boys went in for medicine, because they were accustomed to the doctors and treated them, you know, like that.
When your brothers wanted to be doctors, did your mother and father like that idea? Were they?
Anything that would be better their education, my father would have gone for it 100%, because he believed in education. See, he didn't have such a good education, and he always felt that a child could get along better if they were well educated. And when Joe went away to be a doctor, he was the first one to go, and it wasn't as expensive for the tuition in that time. And of course he had to board also, because there was nobody in the city that time that could keep him. But when Anton went in to be a doctor, Ella and I had an apartment, and he used to stay with us while he went to school. So for that reason, it was not as expensive. And then during the summer, he would work. He worked with an engineer and did a lot of work and had a good paying job in the summer.
So you could put yourself through medical school then, whereas now it's just a big difference now.
Oh my
so
goodness,
expensive.
yes. And then they didn't have to go as long. I think that they only went 5 years. And now I
Wow.
think it's 8
Including college, you
Yeah.
mean? Oh, that is a big difference, yeah. Now you go to college and then you go to
And then you
medical
go to
school and
our
then you
school.
specialize.
Stanley had to do that too, and by the time...
did he?
Yes, he had to have longer, he had to first go to college, because he went to Ursinus College for a while.
Now who helped him get through all that schooling?
Well, by that time, things were a lot different. There was a lot of more money in the business that Daddy was in then, and the people, I told you, after the First World War, the people drank more. You could see the biggest difference in the people after the war. When I was growing up, there was never any thought of war. See, now the war started in 1917, 18, didn't it? You see, by that time, I was 17, 18 years of age, and my whole young life, there was no thought of war, no fear of any kind. They didn't even have taxes that they paid, like you do income taxes or anything like that. It was very different.
So after the war, the feeling was that everything was going to be wonderful.
Sure.
Because that was it for world wars, I guess, they thought.
Well, it was sure was never going to be another one.
Right.
And there were so many of the boys from town that my mother knew that went into the First World War that it was terrible. And when the war was over, the people in town, just in their ordinary clothes, had a parade, and the men with their pots and pans, they went down there, no band or anything that they could have. Yeah.
Your brothers, they weren't in the war there, were they? Or were they in World War I?
Yes. Brother Joe was a captain, I think, down in Fort Oglethorpe, down in Georgia. He was there for probably the whole duration of the war. He was never sent to the front. But Anton was only in it for a short time because he was really not old enough. So they had sent him up to State College to learn something up there that there was connection with it. And then by that time the war was over.
Right.
If it had lasted longer.
But for the Second World War, he was in the full length of time. He was over in England. He was stationed over there at the field hospital.
Now, didn't he get hurt? Was that war related or?
Yeah, he was going on an assignment with one of the ambulances or trucks or something, I don't know, and the truck went down the bank. He never was able to complete with his medical work after that because he couldn't bend so well. He got total disability all
Wow.
after that, and so that's how he went into eye work. And there was no room for him to get into the colleges in the States, and so he went back over to England and studied his eye work over there. And he was very good with it. All my brothers were good doctors because they were very good in diagnosing a case right away. And I think it was in their, in their blood.
In their
They were
blood,
just born for it.
Yeah.
Well, look at all you girls, how many of you have gone in for nursing. It seems that most of the family have always wanted to do things for others. I mean, to help people in one way or another.
I think it's in people's blood. It's
I
a
think
gift or a
so.
knack
I
or
think so.
something. Yeah. So where are we here? Oh, we were talking about what your mom was like. You told us that. And you told me one time that you were your father's favorite.
Oh yes. Well,
Why do you
I think that must have been because the other girls were already grown. Because Sienna was about 10 years older than me, and Ella too would have been 8, and then there was Joe and Antone before I came, and then 2 boys after me. So naturally, I was the only girl, for a long time, and
You're
I
a
think
nice
that's
change.
why. Sure.
And you were the 2 boys after you?
Antone, Stanley and Count.
And Count.
Francis.
He was the youngest then, Count.
No,
Or Stanley was the
Stanley
baby.
was the baby.
So your dad favored you?
So much so it was really funny. I could get anything from him I wanted.
Well, that's not nice.
It isn't, but it's the truth.
Yeah.
And then we used to go out he used to go fishing. And he'd take me fishing when I was really little before school age. Now a school age child is not going to sit quiet.
still.
He used to
Yeah.
take me out in the boat with him. And then, of course, I'd be hopping around.
Right.
So he'd take me into the land and put me down and say, now stay here till I come back.
Wow. So you just watched.
But we also used to go up on the hill because St. Clair is surrounded by hills, and it was common for people. They didn't have any entertainment during the day, so Sundays he would take a day off and take some of the boys and me, and we would go up, and he'd cook our dinner up there. He'd take up a big pot, a black pot, which would be lined in white inside, and he would put carrots and potatoes and bacon in that. And I just happened to see somewhere, I don't know where it was, and he'd put a lid on it. And then he'd make it so that it wasn't, nothing could get inside of it. And he'd put the earth on top of it and dig a hole and put the pot down in there and put the fire down in there and cover it over. That stuff used to taste good. Yeah.
It's funny. How old were you when your parents died? Were you an adult when
Oh
you died?
yes, both mother and father. I was, Daddy died just the year that Beatrice was born, because I've told you before
About that story.
that I was home at the time, and Daddy had an accident while he was out hunting. He used to teach the boys how to go rabbit hunting. So he was down with Joe and his wife Margaret, and then Daddy and he, they'd gone out hunting, and somehow or other he didn't have a safety lock on the barrel, and he tripped over the snow, and he got shot in the leg. And so they took him to the hospital, and they were going to amputate his leg up as far as the knee. And his heart gave out while he was on the operating table, and they had no oxygen. So he just died, that's all.
How old was he, do you think?
He was about 70. And I was already, I don't know how old.
28.
Oh, Lord, more than that. I was
Well, B was born in 28.
1928, you mean?
Was she? Well, I was 29 then.
Yeah.
And then Mother died when I was about 22, but she died in 41.
So she lived a long time after
Well,
your father died?
yes, about 7 years only.
Oh, okay.
That's all, just about 7 years.
And you mentioned that she had a stomach problem all the time.
She claimed that she had, what do they call it? Not scarlet fever.
When she was a little girl or
when she
whatever.
was little. And she said it left her with a weak stomach. and she never was able to sit down and eat a full meal. She used to eat a lot of vegetables, and if she wanted a piece of meat, she would chew it up and then she wouldn't swallow it.
Was her stomach
It
handle
wouldn't take it. She used to have an awful lot of stomach trouble. So I don't understand it when I think about it today. She would get such extreme pains in her stomach, and the doctor would come and give her a shot in her arm and make her unconscious. I don't know what he used to do, but she would become unconscious, and then when she would get awake, why the pain would be gone. But that was the only
Sounds
thing
like
they
a blockage in the intestines or
they
something.
wouldn't. I never heard it diagnosed, and I still don't know. But she used to take the darndest stuff to make her bowels. Well, she didn't take time to go to the bathroom, I guess.
It sounds like
And
from
it
all
wasn't-
she was doing.
And it wasn't comfortable to sit in the outside toilet
And wait, yeah,
That's true.
right.
So,
And she died of stomach cancer from that,
Yeah.
right?
mhm. But she never was in bed. She
Ah.
wasn't in bed until about 4 days before she died, when
You're
she
kidding.
became unconscious. We were sitting,
Boy, oh boy.
the night she became unconscious, we were sitting upstairs in the living room, as I told her the living room was upstairs, and we had the radio on. And I can remember so clearly, and the boys, we were having 40 hours of church, and the two boys, and Nikki and Robert, were altar boys. So they came in from church, and they were all up in their room and sitting down, and they were playing some kind of waltz music on the radio. And Mother says to them, "What are you sitting there like stumps? Why don't you get up and dance?" She said, "If I didn't have this big stomach, I'd get up and dance with you." And that night she became unconscious. And she gained consciousness in the oddest ways that time. And I often think about it when they talk about people being, unconscious. You never can tell just what's going to happen, because her sisters came down from Shamokin to see her, and they were sitting. We had put the bed up in the living room, because even though she'd not been bedfast, she would sometimes lie down to rest. And they were sitting there talking. They were all talking together, and it was time for them to go home. And she was lying there unconscious and hadn't entered into the conversation at all. So they got up and went to go. Mother says good night. She sat right there.
Oh my word.
Yeah.
I hope they weren't talking about her.
Yes, it does. It does. And another time, see, with the boys being doctors, Anton went over. I'll never forget this one either. He went over. You know how they lift their eyes to see
See
if
if the pimples are.
and she says, "What are you looking for, Beth? He didn't come yet."
Oh boy.
I tell you, Anton left the room quick.
Jeez. And this was right before she died.
Yeah, she died that same night.
Now you had moved back and lived in the house you grew up in.
I went up during the Depression with the boys, with the children, with Beaters too. And
So you had all your children by the time you moved back up?
Yeah, no, Stanley was born
Oh,
in
that's okay,
Pottsville.
Stanley was
Every
after.
time I moved, I had a baby.
You had a baby. You see, do you think there's a connection there with
I'm
the
positive.
moving?
New environment. Yeah.
So you were there, for how long were you living in?
In St. Clair?
Yeah, in St. Clair with the family.
Well, I'll let you figure it out.
Yeah, okay.
I went up and.
Who were you carrying when
I
you went
went
up?
nobody. Frank was about 6 to 8 months old when I
Okay.
went home.
Yeah.
And they were all finished high school when I got back, except Stanley.
So that was a long time.
Yes.
And then when you moved
Well,
back to Philadelphia, or you
In
said
47. We moved to Philadelphia. We were right on the boulevard. That was Harry bought the house and we lived there. It was complicated as to why I stayed so long. One reason was when I went up during the Depression. And after the Depression was over, and my brother Francis had opened a store. They closed the saloon when Daddy died. And he didn't like it. So he used to sell gas and ice cream and candy and hot dogs and things like that. And he said to me, "I'm not going to stay with it any longer." He was already married. And they had one boy that was Snooky. And he said, "I'm just going to let you take it over." He says, "You have time?" I says, "I have a good time. I'm raising all the children and all the house and everything." But nevertheless, he walked out, and he and Ann went over to live in the house. So I got involved with the house, and Mother was still living. So I stayed there, and then after she died, Well, she died in 41, and until you get things straightened out, it was up until about 47 when I would have left. But if I hadn't had that store, I'm sure I would have gone sooner. But it was awfully hard. I would stay in the store, and when the children would come home from school, and then about when I put them to bed about 8 or 9 o'clock, I would lie down with them for about an hour, and then go in and stay up in the store until 11, 12 o'clock at night.
The store was open, or you were working?
No, we're working in the store because people who were selling gas should go out and fill the cars with gas.
And you ran the store yourself? Did the kids help you? Were they old enough to help?
They
Not
didn't
really?
help really.
They got in the way.
The-
Just like our kids.
The only thing that they helped with was help eat the candy and the
Right.
ice cream.
That's what I was going to ask you. I thought I remembered something about an ice cream.
They had a bonus
booth?
if you sold so much ice cream towards the end of any fiscal year, you got so much ice cream free or got a bonus. So when it would come to that time, they would help themselves. We kept Byers ice cream. It was good ice cream.
Is that what got you through the Depression, the store, or is this a different time?
No, it was during that time. I was both. No, I don't say I was in the store during the Depression. Maybe not all of it, from
Yeah.
part of it. Yeah. But it was hard during the Depression. My goodness, you didn't have anything. The children had 2 sets of clothes, one for school and one for Sunday. That was all.
Wow.
And you lived on
And you
soup.
grew vegetables and turnips?
Sure.
Yeah.
I never used turnips.
No?
Nobody ever seemed to like turnips in our family.
Can't
We
blame
had
them.
pancakes and apple fritters and things like that.
Those apple fritters were good, though. I remember you making them when we were little.
But we didn't have a whole lot of meat. But they all grew up.
Well,
But-
now they're telling you meat's no good for you anyway, so
You need
depression
some,
worked
though.
out well.
But you know, when I brought the children home, it was different than when I was home as a child, because by that time automobiles were in and transportation was different, and people got more, and they had we didn't even have radio when I was little. We only had a phonograph, and the round cylinders that you used to put something on that looked like a little barrel with a hole in the center, and put it on the machine and play it. Well, we used to
Wind it up?
Yeah, wound it and keep on playing it. Vastly different. The first radio we had was one that Harry put together himself. You know,
Really?
Oh,
You
yeah.
wired it together?
and the first television we had was from your daddy, Nicky, coming up from Washington, and he brought his television with him when he came up over a holiday. And when he went to go home, he wanted to take it back with him because it was his.
His mistake.
And Harry said, "Oh, you can't take that." And Nicky said, "Sure, I can take it, and I'm going to take it." He says, "If you want one, go and buy it." So Harry went out and bought one.
Wow.
This was down on the boulevard.
Sure.
Where did you live when you first got married, before you went?
Oh dear,
Did you have apartments, or?
we lived in an apartment over in Newark. When we were first married, that's where we lived in Newark, and he had his place of business in Newark. And then when he closed that and he went over to work in New York, then we went to live closer to New York, and we went to Jersey City. But I didn't like the apartment in Jersey City. It was very convenient for him to go back and forth to New York. It would only take him
But you
about
didn't
10
like it.
minutes. But I didn't like it. The place was infected with roaches, and
Ugh.
I just couldn't stand it.
I don't blame you.
So then we moved to out to Long Island.
Long Island? Were these all apartments that you had?
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
We never lived in the house
Yes.
until we came back to Philadelphia.
But there was
After we came off from Long Island, then we came back and lived out in West Philadelphia for about 2 or 3 years, and then the Depression came along, and then I went home. And after that, we lived on the boulevard.
And Grandpa had the business downtown when the Depression hit? In Philadelphia?
No, he was over in New York at the time.
He still was?
Mhm.
So how did you wind up in Westchester then?
Westchester, no,
what-
West Philadelphia.
West Philadelphia?
No, he wasn't. He was already back in Philadelphia when the Depression stopped.
Okay.
He was not. He was not in business. He was not doing
Oh.
anything special.
Okay,
He
yeah.
was doing odd jobs, but not anything like he liked. You see, he was in business with Mr. Barole, and when he wanted to sell out his portion of business, Mr. Brolin, he had some kind of a difference of opinion. Why he sold his business to Mr. Brolin, he went over to New York and he started up in business over there. But unfortunately, one of the salesmen that they had when they were together went with Harry over to New York, and Mr. Brolin objected to it and had an indictment made that he could not sell for him until the case was settled. And because of that, why he was not able to continue his business because he didn't have the proper
secret
time.
salesman.
Yeah. But he was in business over in New York, I would say 2 or 3 years, I don't remember exactly. Then the funny part of it is when he came back, they went back to business together again.
You're kidding?
Oh,
in,
yes.
In Philadelphia?
Yeah.
when you get married?
Until Mr. Barol died, they stayed in business until Mr. Barol died. He died while they were still in business together. And they were as different as day and night.
Yeah.
Mr. Barol was a little quiet man, and your daddy used to do all of the planning and all the getting in all of the merchandise and stuff like that, and watch over the factory. And Mr. Barol, when he worked in the office, he would make sure that everything, the bills were paid and take care of that. But they got along nicely together. And Mr. Barol, the funny thing about him was, he was never married. Now, he was in the service. Daddy was not in the service. And Mr. Barol was in the service. And
World War II, I guess.
yes, and he never got married until he was, I guess, 50, maybe even older than that. And he married his sister-in-law, whom he had known for years and years. You know, his brother had died a couple of years prior to that, and he married her, and they lived together, I think, 2 weeks. And that was all.
Oh my
Never went back
gosh.
together again. Isn't that awful? I never could understand it. Harry said when they first got married, this was never going to work out.
He knew?
He knew both of them. But that's what happened.
Why did Grandpa not go into service, or everyone enlisted and he just didn't? Or?
I don't know why he
Well, was
would-
he an American? When did he, I mean, was he able to go in, like, for World War I? He was still young, wasn't he?
Well, he wasn't here, I don't think, during World War I. I don't think he came over until after the war was over. I'm sure not. Because he came over to this country when he was between 16 and 18 years old. And
Yes, but I thought wasn't he born in 1880, something, 84?
I have it here somewhere. Where's my slip of paper? I have how
Oh yeah.
old he was.
Time for the notes.
You had them sitting here on this table.
I know, but I didn't come up.
Jenny was around.
Jenny was here. I don't see him.
Well, you know they're here somewhere on my lap.
There, that's a good place.
I have it in here somewhere.
Well, he would have had to have been a citizen, too, to fight in
He
the
was
wars.
born in 1884.
Yes, see, I knew that. He was your husband.
That's all right.
So he was, 16 at the turn of the century. He was 35 when the war started.
Well,
Maybe
see,
he
then
was too old.
He was too old for the
Sure,
war.
that
Oh,
would be
okay.
it.
Yeah, that's what it was.
Okay.
And you know, when he came over from this country, he had finished his schooling over there, but he was ready to go into college, and he wanted to be a doctor. And Dr. Flex and his family came over about the same time. His father had been here some years before, and he came over with his mother and 3 sisters. And his mother says to him, "What, you want to be a doctor?" They were in New York at the time, and they were getting 50 cents a call. And he says, "Well, you think you're going to kill yourself going out to see these people with all kinds of ailments for 50 cents? So Dr. Flex became a dentist, but Harry got into leather goods. When he first came over, he got in as an apprentice in somebody's factory over in New York. I don't remember who. And from that, then he lived over in New York up until, I guess about 8 or 9 years before we were married, and then he came over and went into business with Mr. Barol.
And was always in the leather business.
He was in the leather business over 50 years. And he used to sell to all the big department stores over New York. And at one particular time, he had a display in the windows over in Saks over in New York. He made beautiful things.
Did you tell me he designed them?
He designed them and saw how they were manufactured, worked in the watched the factory workers. And he would go out selling to the big people. He used to sell to the Gimbels and Wanamaker's and Lids, all of those stores.
So he did that till how old? How old was he when he stopped working?
He died in '66. He was retired, I wouldn't say not more than 5 years, would you say, Mary?
Wow, so he worked till he was almost 80?
I would think, yeah.
Well, what did he sell the company, or did it just dissolve?
No, he sold it. He sold it to a company that was in business there for many years. If they're not in business yet, down at 12th and Race Street. Because his name was on the window for a good many years.
No kidding.
I think the reason, I think he would have liked to work longer than that because he was capable of doing it. But that's about the time that they started to go into the plastic. He worked with real leather. And he
Things
couldn't
were changing.
and they had to have different machinery for the plastic and all kinds of different methods. And he was too old to begin to think
To
of
make
getting
changes.
into all
Sure.
that stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think we covered enough for today.
Yeah,
I think you're
I think
tired.
your throat is sore.
It was sore before she started.
And my head's just getting bugged.
Yeah.
We can hear that sometime, and then you can see
Yeah.
what part we covered with our questions, and then you can go over them the next time.
That sounds good.
You did good.
That sounds good.
Call Jenny's interruptions and noise.
Oh, Jenny didn't interrupt me. She was